So, hello and welcome to the new series of Icons of Relocation. I'm your host, Simon Johnston, CEO of Icon Relocation, which is one of the leading relocation companies in the UK, looking after issues such as home search, property management, and removals. Now, for those who haven't been listening to these podcasts, I would strongly recommend go back and listen to the one we had with Matthew Savage from Savills. It was incredibly informative. Matthew was amazing and gave an overview of how the housing market in the UK really got to where it is, and also gave some predictions of where it's going. And it was such an interesting conversation. I thought we'll sort of build on the back of that. And I'm delighted to say, with me, my colleague Rebecca Gunn. Hi, Rebecca. How are you doing?
Hello, all good, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
good. Thank you so much for joining us. In fact, before we get into things, can you just sort of fully introduce yourself and what you do within the company?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Rebecca Gunn, formerly Rebecca Highland. I used to work with the Global Mobility Operations team starting in 2015, and then back in 2019, I left to have a couple of babies. I had twins, and then I've recently returned to the company under my married name, Rebecca Gunn, last November to also be in the operations team alongside a new team called the property support team. And then later on, I'll be moving on to different roles within the company to help support different departments.
Fantastic. Well, it just shows we're speaking to the right person. So, just talking about the housing market for a second. So,
hmm
Savills gave a really interesting view, as I said, as how we got here. But
Yeah,
you and your colleagues are in this every day. You're doing research all the time,
yeah.
continuously. Can you give your view? I mean, what are you seeing out there in regard to the housing market, and how would you sort of summarize it if you were trying to do such a thing?
In one word, potentially challenging. Obviously, there's different briefs that we have to meet on a day-to-day basis. Everyone's criteria is different, but generally, what we're seeing is that the market is extremely fast paced than we've ever seen before. Even years ago when we used to say that the market was fast paced, it is really on another level now. Just to give you an example, we're booking
Mm,
properties in, and then for a takeout the next day, and then within half an hour they're ringing us up to say, I'm really sorry, but this now property's now gone under offer and we can no longer show it. And it might be a property that's only just gone on the market that day. So we are having those challenges in that respect. But also we found as well that what was once a £1,500 one bedroom apartment that could quite easily be found anywhere in London, even in the close to the city, things are dramatically more expensive, and it's trying to manage those expectations with the assignees that are moving over to the UK, that potentially have colleagues that have moved over a couple of years previous that have gone, I've got this really nice one bedroom apartment right close to where I need to be. I just jump on the tube. I'm 5 minutes walk from the tube, and then I'm 10 minutes into the office. That's now no longer the same situation. So it's trying to kind of divert them away from that way of thinking and just being a bit more upfront and transparent with them as to what's going on, just so that they're aware of things and moving very quickly.
mm,
Um, and that's happening across everywhere. So we used to be able to say to people, you can move out further away you go, the longer commute you've got, but the lower the property prices are. But because that's now happening more and more, the prices are increasing the further out we go. Um, Things have eased up a bit in the last month or so, we found, in terms of like stock levels and being a bit more available. However, it does mean that I think that's more because things are being put onto the market a lot earlier to give a kind of a false representation of what's on the market right now to move into,
yeah.
because we could be looking on the market and things are not available for another couple of months, and that's because our agents are proactively putting their stock up for market way in advance than they would usually, in order to still be present on the agent market. So that's another thing, just being aware of the fact that we need to get people out a little bit quicker in order to be successful in finding their home and what they want.
Okay. I mean, there's some really interesting things there. So if I can go back and sort of unpack some of those comments.
hmm
I mean, we cover the whole of the UK and more, but let's just focus on sort of London and the southeast because I think that's
Yeah.
really sort of the epicenter of the conversation. Now, you said rents are going up,
hmm
and I think universally everybody's aware of that. But can you give some insight into what is meant by rent going up? What sort of
Yeah.
levels are you seeing or being reported?
So it's slightly different in different kind of caliber of properties that I found. if we start off with a one-bedroom apartment, central London. So when I say central London, I mean, places like Clerkenwell, Angel, all the hotspots, Islington, that people like to live because they've got the
Sure.
vibe that they want to be in, but also easily connectable into the city where their offices are. We used to see that one bedrooms, you could get a decent one bedroom for £1,500 a month, excluding bills. Now we're saying to people, you're looking more at about 18 to 2,000 a month for a one bedroom in those kind of areas.
Right.
And then further out, so places like Stratford, Wembley, maybe even into like Canary Wharf and things, those prices have then also increased as a result of that, because people are moving further out in order to achieve the cheaper rents. So that's similar. I would say you could achieve more of a one bed in Wembley Stratford at around 16, 17
Okay.
at a push, but obviously the demand for that is high, so therefore it is really competitive. Um, and then two beds are around, I would say, like 2, 3, 2, 4, and then they can it's like they can go up massive amounts, because if you've got like a penthouse right in the middle of, you know, next to
Yeah.
Angel Station, then you're paying for that
Well,
that
yeah, one bedroom
luxury.
encompasses a lot, doesn't it? From
Yeah,
tiny properties to
absolutely.
something quite palatial. Yeah.
Yeah, but then I found more recently, like the family homes, for example, that are in the hotspots around the schooling areas, properties that were once, four-bedroom properties, unfurnished, which are near the schools, were about 5,000 a month, and now you're looking at a minimum of like 7, 8,000. So in that
And this is
respect,
over a year or so period, basically.
yeah. So we have had people that have moved in, for example, two properties it, probably around 2019, 2020, where the rental prices were much lower because of the pandemic and the fact that, landlords needed people in their properties to live.
Right.
Therefore, they were allowing to be a bit more flexible on rental prices and were being a bit more realistic about what they could achieve. And then they're moving because their tenancy is up for renewal, or the landlord's selling, or they're coming back to live in their own property, or whatever. They've then got to find something new, and they want exactly what they've had because they're used to living there, and they like the
Understandable.
walk to the school or whatever, or the commute to the office. And they're looking now at a minimum of probably 2,000 more pounds a month than they were paying previously. So it's hard to put a number on how things have increased across the board, because I think it's just different depending on where you are, what property you're living in. So that's where it's a bit different and difficult to find some kind of like fixed answer to say, these across the board properties have gone up by this much a
To be
month.
fair, I think I'm being a bit unfair to you on the question because, as we always say, London isn't one city; it's 100 villages. So there's 100
Yeah,
stories to be told here.
definitely.
I accept that. Actually, another thing which you said as well, which again I'd like to go back and sort of just pick up on, is you're talking about the sort of the lead time, and this is something that
Mhm.
Matthew referred to as well.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that you need to be looking for properties earlier to get the maximum stock level. Is that correct? And could you expand on that slightly?
Yeah, I think my opinion is that because the stock is so low, I think agents are being more proactive in terms of contacting current tenants and landlords that they've got on their books to say, this property is coming up for renewal in, let's say, May, given that we're obviously at the beginning of March. Would you like to renew your tenancy, or will you be moving elsewhere? I think we'll find that a lot of agents are saying that a lot of people are going, no, I'll renew, because they don't want to be back out on the market looking for something else.
Right.
But also, if there is a point where the landlords are saying, or the current tenants are saying, yes, we are going to be vacating, we're relocating, whatever, they're then putting it on the market now because to replace anything that they haven't got to show, so that they are then still being present on the real estate market, because if they don't have anything to offer, people are not going to look for these particular agents. This is based on my personal opinion. They then don't no longer have a presence on the market, on Rightmove, Zoopla, etc. So they're putting stuff on the market way further in advance than we're used to. So rather than, we could have people arrive and have 30 days in temporary accommodation, for example, and that's an achievable time frame in order to go out, find a property, move in. I think now more realistically, we need to consider 60 days in temporary accommodation, because things are being advertised, as Matthew said, 6 to 8 weeks in advance.
Right.
So therefore, there's very limited amount of stuff that's vacant on the market, unless they are new buildings, or they're stuff where people have maybe got a short departure date, so therefore, or they're flexible in when they can move. So if they're going elsewhere and they wanted to end their tenancy without being living in the property for that month notice, they can obviously be flexible when they move out, which obviously is a rarity anyway. But we're finding, yeah, that things are going on the market way further in advance, so we're having to be a little bit more proactive, and therefore potentially extending time in temporary housing in order to
Okay.
achieve properties that are available to the individuals when they're coming over.
So that's really interesting. So if you're speaking to somebody coming across, really,
Mm,
you can't start your home search, or at least researching it, early enough, you could argue. So if you can start
yeah.
that even before you get on a plane and coming over to the UK, then there's opportunity of seeing a higher number of properties, is what you're indicating. And even if that's not possible, because let's be honest, on a lot of occasions, a relocation is quite short notice and somebody's traveling. But just
Mm,
be aware of what you're saying is it's sort of 6 to 8 week lead time is
yeah.
now becoming more common than ever before.
Yeah, I think so. And also being a bit more proactive when you land in the UK to, get out fairly quickly,
Right.
in order to like not have that extra delay. Obviously, we've got that added challenge if you're looking for stuff whilst you're not in the UK, the likelihood of that stuff still being on the market when you're actually on the ground is probably
Common.
quite slim, because things is just being snapped up really quick, even if we have got the longer lead times, or longer move-in dates. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation, in the fact that we're telling people you have to be more proactive,
Mm.
but if you send us stuff, or you're finding stuff that you like, that you want to view 2 weeks ahead of your flight time, it's unlikely that that stuff is still going to be sitting on the market for you to actually get your foot in the door. So we have had instances where people are doing virtual home searches, where we're taking people out,
Mhm.
via FaceTime. We're viewing on their behalf, providing our
So we can do that. So we
expert.
can go and look
Yeah,
for them in
definitely.
advance.
That's a new way of working, and it's something that we're trying to be more flexible around if people are happy with that. Obviously, you have to be aware of the fact that our view and us as actually physically walking around the apartment could be different to what the individual would be seeing, and they ultimately
Yep,
got
fair
to live
comment.
there. So it's being transparent about that, and say, look, if you're going to put an offer forward on something you haven't physically seen in person, just
Yeah.
be aware of the fact that there could potentially be stuff that you are picking up on that
Okay.
we wouldn't do. But obviously it has worked quite well. We have done it previously, and obviously it was the only way to do it when
Oh, during COVID,
things were
yeah, good
being
point.
advertised then.
Got a lot
So
of
I think
practice then.
agents obviously are aware of that way of working anyway. So I think it's just being providing those options, so that every assignees have everything presented to them in order to make the best decision, basically.
All right, really good advice, Becca. Thank you very much for that. Can I just sort of move on to a separate topic as well?
Hmm.
I mean, the dream always is when you secure a property. So we found the perfect property is to have a 1 year contract with a 6 month break clause, second year option, third year option, etc. That's
Hmm.
always been sort of the utopia, hasn't it? I think it gives everybody the flexibility.
Yeah,
How
definitely.
practical is that? In the market, as you've just been explained, can we still get that, or is there some pushback on those areas?
There is definitely some pushback. It's not something that we would say is the norm anymore, in the fact that to expect that to be agreed, and that's just because there is more people going for the same apartment at the same time. So therefore, you're up against potentially a better term offer. So it's more being realistic about what we put forward. So if we were to put an offer forward for a 12-month contract, 6-month break clause, option 1 and 2, the landlord's going to look at that and say, well, that's not really that attractive, in the fact that I could only have someone there for 6 months. I want someone in there for much longer, which is obviously something that we would have come across previously anyway. But then there's more likely someone to be, or two, three people offering on the same apartment, that are saying, I'll live there for 18 months. I don't need a break clause. So we have to be mindful of that, and just be
Mm.
give the advice of the fact that this, if you want to put an offer forward for a 12-month or an 18-month straight, that's fine, but be aware of the fact that there is no opportunity for you to depart prior to that without any kind of penalty. And then even then, the landlord doesn't have to agree to it. But we're finding that because the assignees are being given that advice and it's upfront, they
Mhm.
are more amenable to agreeing to that and being realistic in the fact that they have to potentially be flexible. There are instances where we have people that it's company wide policy that we have to have some kind of break clause, and generally agents that we work with on a regular basis, that the bigger corporate agents are agreeable to that, and they guide their landlords accordingly, and a lot of them are landlords that are professional landlords and
Okay.
are happy to accept those kind of terms. So it's not saying that those terms are no longer something that we're seeing to be accepted. It's just less likely on a day-to-day basis that we would be achieving a 6 months break clause. But equally, I think people as well that are coming over want
Mm.
the security as well for a longer term. So it's something that is not potentially as readily expected from the other side either. If you were to ask me the question, do you think that the stock levels are going to change anytime soon?
I was
If
going to
we're
ask you that.
if we're agreeing to tenancies that are 12 months, 18 months, 24 that started year 2 years ago are then going to be obviously coming back onto the market potentially, and people are going to be moving around because that's happening more than it was 18 months ago. So I think stuff will improve in the fact that stuff will come on the market, but I just don't think that there's going to be um, an influx of lots of properties that are going to be available to choose from readily. I think it's just going to be a continuation of what we've seen in the last 3-4 months, and it's just going to keep churning that way rather than stuff that's going to be available to them instantly.
Okay. Well, Bonnie, well, you answered the question I was going to ask you next, which is what do you think is going to happen? So, thank you for getting ahead of me on that one. So perhaps last it with one last question. You mentioned
Mm,
this right at the beginning as well, that if somebody's in a property and their contract's coming to an end, but they want to stay in the property, so they want to
mm,
renegotiate and stay in. So let's just say somebody doesn't have that clause for a rolling extension in play.
yeah.
Are you seeing far more, how can I put this, sort of maybe slightly more aggressive negotiations in regard to what a landlord would want? You mentioned that right at the very beginning about the fact that rents have jumped up. So is that a
Yeah.
factor?
Yes, I think so. I think people that were starting tenancies back in 2019, 2020 obviously had the added benefit of having lower rents than we're seeing now. The downside of that is that we're finding that when we come to renewal now,
Mm.
because the market has grown quite significantly in terms of monthly rental prices, landlords are coming back with quite a significant percentage increase that they're expecting if they would like to renew to a further term. And sometimes that's just not achievable for people that are currently sitting in the property. It's just not affordable. So
Right.
I think potentially what will happen is that people like ourselves that are negotiating on people's behalf for new tenancies, I would say it would be beneficial for us to push for some kind of clause in there to say any type of renewal
Mhm.
should be subject to any kind of minimum and maximum increase.
Right.
Obviously, that's obviously dream world again, as you said earlier, in terms of a clause that potentially the landlord's not going to agree to. But in some cases, we're seeing landlords asking for a 50% increase in rent. And
50%.
yeah, and that's just, I think sometimes I feel like potentially landlords are using the situation to their advantage. And, why wouldn't they? Because they can capitalize on getting the
Mm.
money in that the currently the house next to them is achieving, because potentially that's gone on to rent more recently. But then also, I think landlords would also consider, the tenant that they've had in house for however long, and do we want the hassle of moving them out, getting someone else,
Right.
potentially not
There's
having
a
the
value
same.
in the stability of
Yeah,
the tenant.
I think that would be our negotiation power in the fact that we could bring that to the table and say, look, we have got the family or the individual would like to renew for another 12 months, 18 months. They are happy with the rental increase, but they are going to offer this amount. Is that achievable? Is that acceptable? And basically bring to the table that they have been a good tenant throughout the last tenancy term. I think it's going to be interesting to see how those kind of situations play out for sure. We have had a couple recently that have been at that level, so we haven't got any kind of answers yet in terms of how those are going to go. But I think that will be an interesting talking point moving forward as to how many more we see and how aggressive the landlords are in terms of their
Wow.
expectations of rent
It's
increases.
a good point, and maybe that's something we do. I mean, I have to say that when I was speaking to Matthew at Savills,
Mm,
he said obviously this is a continuing story, and
yeah,
he's very
absolutely.
kindly said he'll come back in and have another chat and maybe a handful of months and see where we are. So maybe you, one of your team, can do the same thing. So I think this is a really
Yeah,
interesting
absolutely.
file. What are the agents seeing compared to what we're seeing, and giving
Hmm.
the best advice possible back to signees. So if you're going to sort of sum things up, if you had somebody about to relocate now and they're having a chat, any
Yeah.
sort of just bottling us up, say what would be your best tips of advice?
So definitely be proactive, look at the market ahead of time so that you're being realistic as to what we're looking for, what you want, just so that it's not just advice that we're providing you. Just be a bit more proactive in looking online yourself. As soon as you land in the UK, go out on home search. Potentially, corporate clients need to look at extending temporary housing and being more flexible with that. In a nutshell, just it will be okay. It's very different to potentially conversations you've had with previous relocation employees. Um, and
Yeah,
we're obviously armed with all of the knowledge and experience that we've been seeing in the last few months anyway. So just be realistic and proactive, and open to different areas and property types and stuff like that.
brilliant. Very nicely said. Thank you very much. He said we always find properties for people. It's just understanding what the
100%.
market is. It's really hard, isn't it, to understand how much has changed. We're
Yeah,
living and breathing
definitely.
it. Sometimes it takes us by surprise how much has changed. But I have to say, Becca, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us in this
You're
conversation.
welcome.
I look forward to having a chat in maybe a few months and see where we are then. So
Yeah,
thank you again.
definitely. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.